And our next speaker is Joe Emison, who's going to talk about lessons learned and detailed architecture from building to serverless applications. He's an early voice in these new architectures with his writing in the new stack. His day job as CTO of BuildFax has allowed him to exploit serverless architectures to bring new products to market in rapid time.
All right, excellent. I'm very happy to be here to talk to all of you. And I want to talk about serverless from a very business-focused perspective. I started as an engineer. I'm now very much closer to the pointy-haired boss position in my job. And I get paid to worry about how we develop products more effectively, products that people actually use. And I want to start with a number of assertions that I live my life by and my job by, and then I'm going to go into extreme detail on two applications that are serverless, that are live in the world today that you're happy to beat on. I'm happy to have you beat on and get feedback. And I want to start by saying that we have to remember that most products die, most companies die, because they built something that nobody wants, right? They run out of resources before they reach product market fit. Okay, I'm deeply concerned about that. I see a lot of waste there. I also really don't believe in the 10x software developer. So the ability of solving this product market fit by I'm going to find this genius software developer and they're going to develop this application immediately, I don't believe. But what I do believe is 10x product development. I believe that there are product development organizations, that's from product to delivery, that are 10 times more effective than the average, and maybe even 100 times more effective than the average. So what do I mean by 10x product development? So I mean, you're writing business-specific code. So are you building something that somebody won't use? Well, that's not helpful to you, right? Are you building something that, in theory, they would use, but the way you built it, they won't use? Are you building something that's already been built, and your engineers are just having fun and playing around rebuilding something? We live in a world where we can rent most of these services now. And then are we building code in a way that gives us a lot of regressions? So all of these things are what 10x product development is versus the average. Another really important thing, and I think probably the largest driver for me towards serverless, is maximizing iterations against customers. I fundamentally believe that product market fit is about how many iterations you get against your customer. And so if your product development organization is an executive who sits down with an engineer and they spec a bunch of stuff out, and the first time that a customer sees that product is 9 months later, good luck, because that isn't going to be at product market fit. Product market fit is about being able to iterate rapidly on customers, having an architecture that allows you to make really big changes in response to customer feedback, and clearly you have to deploy all the time. And finally, 10x product development is about minimizing dependencies. So don't make your developers wait for DBAs, for IT ops, for other developers, and don't make them stop because you haven't given them enough details. So this is the context that I care about serverless in. So I'm going to start with a demo. We'll see if this works any better than getting my computer hooked up. So this is a site that's like Zillow for commercial real estate. It is on its way to 300,000 monthly uniques. So it's got a decent amount of traffic on it. It is entirely serverless in terms of the user availability, and I'll give you a deep dive into its architecture. So the key thing here is just to give you a sense of what it is. So we'll see if the wireless is working here for me. So I can search for a location. I'm going to search for Dallas. I'm looking for commercial real estate. I can do all sorts of filtering. I can say just things for lease. I can save this search, and every day I will get an email with changes to these search results, okay? And then what I'd ask you to do is, as I'm showing this, sort of think in your head, how would you architect this today? What would be your default way of building this? And how many lines of code? I want you to have in your head like a sort of a number of lines of code you think that this should be, how long this would take, how you would estimate this out. I can go look at details of any listing. I can have a variety of images on listings. I can fill out a contact form to contact the broker who's listed here. I can also log into the site. And when I log in, I can go add listings. And adding a listing allows me to add a listing immediately and immediately to those search criteria. I won't go through the full details, but if we were going to add where we are now, I can go select some details. I go to Google Street View, it'll show me a map, et cetera, et cetera. You can see it's fairly fast. And then I've got a find a broker index. If I want to go find a broker out in the world, I can go search for that broker. Okay? So that's just an overview. I would be happy if all of you search for your next commercial real estate space to lease or invest in. If you go to commercialsearch.com, it's a great site. But that's what it is. That's what it does. So let me give you some stats on it. But again, just sort of think, like, what's the lines of code? What's the scale of doing that in whatever your stack is? Oh, I'm sorry. I'm going to go with the architecture first. So let me tell you how it is built. So you got to use a browser. We're delivering HTML, CSS, and JavaScript to it. We use Netlify. I've used S3 website for many years. I've used Firebase hosting. I've used Netlify. No question, if you're hosting these assets, Netlify is the best service out there today. No question. I wasn't even aware of it until a couple months ago. It's the third place that this site has been on. But there's no question, if you're doing static hosting, Netlify is the best thing out there. The search you just saw, that's Algolia. If you don't know what Algolia is, you should. It's just Elasticsearch with a way better API in front of it. It's got one annoyance, but other than that, it's amazing. There's no way I'm ever going back to Elasticsearch if I can avoid it for Greenfield. Images. Those images that we saw, those are Cloudinary. Cloudinary is great. I saw Patrick talk about ImageX. Sadly, ImageX doesn't do browser uploaded images. So you really can't use ImageX if you want users to submit photos. We need that. So Cloudinary it is. Wonderful, wonderful company. The listing details. We went to the listing details page. Those details are not in Algolia. They're in Firebase. And so that makes a Firebase call. The authentication you saw that the login I did, that's also Firebase. When we add a new listing and it immediately goes in, I'm putting it in, it's going into Firebase, and the image uploads are going to Cloudinary. Okay, now it's not totally serverless, but it's serverless with respect to the users. So there are certain things we need to do, for example, indexing back to Algolia, and a couple of other things that we do on a regular basis. We actually ETL in a massive amount of data into this site every night. And so we need ETL servers, but they don't affect availability. They can go down whenever. They're really not a big deal. And they read off a Firebase queue. One of the best features of Firebase is its queue and the queue worker library it has for Node. It is awesome. It's much easier, in my experience, than any other queue service that's out there. We also have an API. Our API is based on Algolia's API because Algolia is amazing and it works very well. It lets us do rate limiting, but you do need an API service out there if you're doing that. Finally, this is a big SEO site. We need to drive a ton of traffic through Google. It's 80% of traffic. Angular, even though it's made by Google, Google doesn't render it properly when it indexes your pages. There's a great service called prerender.io. Netlify has its own pre-rendering service, and it uses the pre-render agent, not as good as pre-render, but Netlify will pass those requests through to pre-render. Pre-render is, again, really wonderful, excellent service. And then finally, we use SendGrid to send those emails. If you remember, you could save a search, and you can get emails every day with updates to the search. Those all go through SendGrid. And this is the stack of the site you see there. We also use Cloudflare actually in between Netlify and the browser. There are a couple other services that get used, but this is the core focus. So again, thinking about sort of lines of code and scale of effort, because my whole thesis here is what I care about is developing quickly, maximum iterations, 10x product development. So this site, 4 months, 2 developers, start to finish, 13,307 lines of code. Now, I've been involved in enterprise development for a very long time. I can tell you that if I saw this in due diligence in acquiring even a startup today, I would expect this to be over 100,000 lines of code. That's what I'm used to seeing. So I view this as very tight. When I talk to great developers, they look at me and they're like, that's even too many. So I don't know. I'm not a developer by day anymore. But suffice to say, the fewer lines of code you have, the faster you can iterate, the easier it is to make big changes. By the way, I don't love TypeScript. There were a couple choices why that was made. I would prefer CoffeeScript. But at any rate, don't write pure JavaScript if you can avoid it. So on this project, I do a developer efficiency metric. So we have certain pointing for stories, and then I ask, let's say it's 2 points per day. How many points do you accomplish at the end of the week? And then what did you lose to regressions? What did you lose to misestimations? What did you lose? How, to Patrick's point, I guess, this is a promise that you're making to the business is what is your velocity going to be? I think I'm used to most organizations just measuring velocity and saying, well, that's what it is. And they don't ask, like, does the actual output match up with the estimation philosophy? But I do. And so generally speaking, almost no regressions, and that's a function of developer quality too, obviously. I think the most important thing that I bring up, and when we onboard new developers onto a stack like this, is that this is a different type of architecting applications. You can't think about this. You can't think about Firebase, for example, as, oh, it's a database as a service. I don't think that's the right mentality. The right mentality is we've got a bunch of microservices. They just happen to be developed by people who aren't us. And those developers, we are asking them essentially to make promises, to bring up Patrick's concept here, right, or what he talked about. We're asking them, we ask our developers, go talk to Cloudinary. It's interesting to have to retrain your developers to say, instead of going to the architect or there isn't IT ops on these projects, but they'll come to me and say, well, Cloudinary's not working right. It's like, well, great, send a support ticket or get on chat with them. Like, that's what they're there for. They're another team. We get to talk to them. We use them. Same thing with Firebase. I think Firebase is an amazing tool. There's nothing out there that's like it for doing something like this project. It's absolutely amazing. But you can't think of it as a database. You can't think of it as like, oh, this is like Mongo, because it's not. The microservices piece that sit on Firebase that enable you as a developer to do things really rapidly is a great API, is really responsive, good support. It's much more like it's a service that meets some needs in the organization. And I really think people discount a lot how much time and effort you spend on building these proxy services. Like I increasingly when I look at architectures that have Elasticsearch, someone's put a proxy service in front of it. Just use Algolia. I mean, that's what they built that for. So we're increasingly getting these services out there. I'm going to talk about specific lessons learned and pain points on this project. We'll talk about the other application. Then I'm going to go back into some global things on security and in why aren't we using any Amazon Web Services features. So Firebase, the dashboard blows if you have a lot of data. They're working on it, but it's unusable over some scale. It is hard to get developers used to, this would be true with going to Mongo or anything too, right? I mean, it's just different to use what's effectively document data. Cloudinary is the result of listening to their clients and building in features in a very sort of crazy way, so you got to use their support to figure out how to do some of the more complicated things. One of the things I didn't call attention to on that site is all the images are watermarked. So we enforce watermarks. That's all done by services. You can't go, there's no way you can figure out how to get an image without a watermark because Cloudinary allows us to enforce that, but setting that up was not the clearest thing in the world in Cloudinary, but it's up. Algolia's one pain in the ass is that every index is sorted on only one criteria in one direction. So we have a grid, which I didn't show you, that allows you to sort by different columns, and it means that our core index of all of those commercial real estate listings has 7 copies of it. Now, Algolia will handle the copies. You just write an update to one master and it replicates across, but you have to pay for all of them. But at any rate, the costs are so low relative to the benefits. But that is a pain point there. Okay, let me talk about a second project. It's going to seem somewhat similar, but there are some other things I'm going to talk about with this one. And this is a name that is going to get renamed, but as the tentative name, or starting name, Property Tour Pro. This is also in commercial real estate. This also has quite a few users, not as many as commercial search. This is a product that if you go on a commercial real estate tour, a lot of times your real estate agent will give you a tour book. This makes a PDF tour book. And it also has a mobile web application that allows you to view things and shortly will allow you to take pictures, make notes, and then you can review them all online. So it's a collaboration tool. This uses Auth0 for a number of things. I'm using it there for a LinkedIn authentication, which is not supported by Firebase Auth, which we were using on the prior project for commercial search. And I have nice, attractive tour books here. I can open up a tour book. And let me show you just a couple features in the tour book. So one of the things that people really like to do is they want to put in a logo for their client, and they spend all day searching on, or they spend a lot of time searching and extracting images from Google Images. So we have hooked up, let's see if Serverless, Serverless Conf is not there. Auth0, another plug here. Oh my goodness, striking out. I don't know if this is an I think it's an internet connectivity issue. Logo Finder, you can log in and try it. It's got a free trial. Let me give you an example here of adding an address. So if let me see if I can recall this one. So I'm on a tour. I want to add an address. I'm using Google Address Query for addresses. And I can search for an address, put in a listing. When I have a listing, it pulls images from commercial search. So these are chained applications that could talk to each other, even though they're all serverless. So there's no server API based here. It's all on the back end. We have a cropper based upon Facebook's cropper, which we re-implemented. And you can drag and move. This is all using Cloudinary plus just an Angular front end. So I can crop, I can move things around. We also hit a bunch of third-party APIs. So we pull nearby photos from an API called Panoramio. We've got walk score there. We've got a factual, will tell us who neighbors are. And there's an image down there, but that will be, that is Foursquare local businesses if we have contact there, or content in there. So there's a lot of those requests are going on. And then I can click a button here and I can go download a PDF, or I can send a mobile. So this will go generate a PDF. It can take some time. And this is hitting a third-party service for this too. So again, all of this as well is serverless. We'll let that go in the background. So let's talk about what the architecture is for this application. So I've got a user browser, right? Same concept. I'm using Firebase hosting. Now, we use Firebase hosting because it still works, but if we were doing it from scratch, I think I'd use Netlify again, which is really a tremendous service for hosting static assets. Cloudinary again. Great image store. Firebase is where all the tour book content is coming from and where we're writing to, and we're writing to Cloudinary for the images. We use Auth0 for that LinkedIn authentication, and that's where all the users are stored. We use DocRaptor to generate the PDFs, which is really, it's prints as a service. If you're going HTML to PDF, it's really the best thing out there. And we use Auth0 Web Task. So this is our sort of Lambda, what we theoretically would use Lambda for, but we use Auth0 Web Task here for reasons that I will go into. But there's a variety of code that we need to run that we can't execute on the client in the client's browser. So specific lessons learned on this project, there is an Angular Fire binding for Angular to Firebase. Don't use it. You should just write your own service with it. Triple binding is difficult, and ultimately your code gets big enough and you don't want it. When you're hitting APIs like Factual, Foursquare, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, a lot of times they have private keys, so you don't want to put that in the user browser. And they also may have the CORS exception, right, where they say, well, we're not used to this. Like, why are we getting this through an XML HTTP web request? Why are we getting this request? And so in that case, you have to proxy all those requests through something. So you could use a Firebase queue and that queue server example, or you can use something like Auth0 Web Task, which works very well for this. We like Auth0 a lot, but the way that documentation is set up and that there used to be Slack support, it's not there anymore, it's been a little difficult, but overall works very well. And then finally, if you're doing DocRaptor to make PDFs and they're very image heavy, DocRaptor, even though it should have good compression, has terrible compression, and so you have to do compression. Thankfully, Cloudinary will let you do that on the fly, and so you can pass through to Cloudinary like 90% compression or 90% or whatever, and we worked with that, and that wasn't a big pain point. Okay. So why haven't I mentioned anything that Amazon Web Services offers? I want to start by saying I'm a big fan of Amazon Web Services. I oversee over $1 million of annual spend on Amazon Web Services. I'm in 2 Amazon Web Services case studies, one on machine learning. It's pretty recent. And I do love Amazon machine learning over everyone else's. But in this case, I don't think Amazon has the best option for any of the services that are out there. To me, and sort of my debate, I guess, to some of the prior sessions today, is that I don't think of serverless as about the back end. And I think that a lot of us think of the middle tier as the core of development. Generally speaking, back-end developers are more revered than front-end developers, and even though the front-end developers are building the end of the value chain to the customers, it's cooler to be back-end. There is not a how to scale sort of equivalent following for front-end developers, I don't think, and not in engineering circles. And so there's a focus on, okay, well, we run all these servers, so serverless must mean we need to take all the code we're running on the servers and run them on containers and that are managed. That's not, I don't think that's the game. To me, what's special about serverless is faster product development. And really what that means is better products, thicker clients. So I wrote an article for the New Stack about 14 months ago. I'll have a link at the end here. I think the middle tier is going away. I think that if we look at where we're going with software development, it's about thick clients. It's about mobile apps, it's about single-page apps, or it's about moving a lot of that processing to the client. And so that means the actual amount of code that we've typically put at this middle tier is just moving to the client, and really what I need and really what I want as someone running product development organizations is how do I get that product development faster? It's really about the services, the serviceful way of life. And so what Lambda offers is just such a small part of what I need. I need Cloudinary, I need Auth0, I need Firebase way more than I need some place to execute code. Amazon Web Services is also now built to extract massive amounts of cash from the enterprise. I feel like what Amazon has done really well is they've taken all the complexity that exists in the enterprise computing that we've had IT ops slowing us all down, and they've just lifted and shifted all that complexity into API-driven stuff, which is great. And it's also great if you're enterprise IT because it means you're not out of a job. I'm interested in enterprise IT being out of a job. They slow things down. The complexity slows things down. It's a pain. So Auth0 web task, I'd say this on Twitter all the time. If you like Lambda and you're doing Lambda for relatively simple things, Auth0 web task isn't going to take over all of your Lambda tasks. I think there are all sorts of things that are very specially suited for something like Lambda. And I think Lambda has a serious role. But in my world of rapid product development, Auth0 web task, if you try it and you compare it to Lambda, if it works for you, you won't leave. It's just WT create the name of your JavaScript file, done. You get the API endpoint. That's it. Security is there that you can use. Firebase, again, if you use Firebase for its full microservice, for its security rules, there's nothing that compares to it. You can't replace it except with writing a proxy service in front of Postgres, essentially. And the Firebase queues are great. I also think that the collection of things that are out there, like the serverless framework, which I think is great, but it's an indication of stuff that's missing in the product. If you need external libraries to have a decent developer experience, I think you got a problem with your product. I'm deeply concerned with product, right? So those are the main reasons why we're not on Amazon. Every single service that I have, and like Patrick mentioned SES. I haven't used SES for years. I don't know anybody who picks SES in a fair fight against something like SendGrid. It's just a better service. So, again, Amazon is great, and I'm a fan of Amazon. But I have a number of other New Stack articles about Amazon. I would love for it to be in my rapid iteration world. I would love for Amazon to be more helpful to me, and I do not find it that way. So I'm going to talk briefly about security, because one of the things when you talk to standard software architects about building these applications that are SBAs, right, that have I'm not running servers to the users, how do you handle security? How do we handle it? I went into my browser, I I wrote a listing, right? I created a listing on commercialsearch.com that's mine, and I sent it to Firebase. I was an unauthenticated user. All that code, it's minified, but I could decompile it and understand what's going on. I could trace the HTTP requests that are going back and forth to Algolia and Firebase, right? I should be able to, as another user, edit somebody else's content, right? There's a big security hole, right? Wrong. So a huge part of this is Firebase security rules, and it's why it is, if you use Firebase and you use its security rules, you really understand what freedom you get from it. Again, not perfect by any means, but the security paradigm that we have in these applications is essentially entirely based on Firebase security rules. And Parse had okay security rules. Firebase's are better. So if you're familiar with Parse and Parse's ACLs, Firebase's security rules are JavaScript expressions that get evaluated. Excellent. Cloudinary, we have a web moderation queue. So if you upload bad images, they all get human moderated. We pay. Cloudinary's got partnerships with something like Web Purifier. They look at it. They authenticate that. And Algolia and Firebase and other things, those all have rate limits. They have rate limits by a variety of different methods. And that's ultimately the best security you're going to have on anything you have, right? At the end of the day, if you allow anonymous internet traffic to your site, your only line of defense against content you're giving anonymously is rate limiting. And so that also gets implemented by all of these services. So they get it. They're there. They deserve to be discovered. To give an example of Firebase's security rules, and this may be way too small, but the deck will be available. You can say things like, hey, you're allowed to write a tour book. That $TID up there in a tour book is like for an arbitrary tour book ID. So you can write there if there's no data there. Okay, so I'm just making a new tour book. I'm just pushing an ID on there. Or if my ID, my authenticated ID, is listed under the child node under owner ID. So if I'm the owner, right? That's the only time I'm allowed to write everything there, and under the content node, I'm allowed to write it only if my ID is under the shared piece. So that means if I am the owner, I can add people to what's under shared, right? Because shared is under the main ID, right? So anyway, I won't go into massive detail, but this is what the security rules look like. This is what is necessary, and this is something that is so unique today to Firebase, especially because Parse is gone or going away. This enables so much of the rapid product development that I'm able to do. Otherwise, this would be an IAM cognito hell, and it would not have nearly as much feature in it. So let me wrap up by saying I would love for you to follow me on Twitter and engage with me on Twitter. It's the best way to reach me. I've written for Information Week, Network Computing, most recently the New Stack. That last link, or just Emison, the New Stack, you'll read my articles. And if you read them in reverse chronological order, it's probably the best way to do them because it goes through essentially a bit more of the theory that I think through in getting to, I want to pick serverless so that I can do 10x product development. So thank you very much.
All right, thank you so much.